If there's one thing Batman has never been able to do, it's eliminate crime from Gotham City. Many think this is because crime is a complex issue with a variety of societal and economic factors contributing to its existence, therefore preventing crime from ever being truly eliminated due to a broken system that can never be fully repaired. I, however, think it's just because Batman isn't strong enough. He can use all the gadgets in the world, put on more and more armor until he's effectively invincible, or even build himself a car so that he's able to go toe-to-toe with literal tanks. But none of this will help him truly eliminate crime. In order to do that, he needs to start lifting. He needs to bulk up. He needs to get bigger, much bigger, if he ever wants to stand a chance at winning his one-man war on crime. So, I set out to enable Batman to do exactly that. By installing a cheat console, you can gain access to console commands, which allow you to do a plethora of things to the game. Perhaps one of the most interesting is this command, which allows you to resize every character in the game. So today, we'll try and answer the question, can you beat Batman Arkham Origins if every knockout increases your size? The rules for this challenge are pretty straightforward. For every person I knock out, I have to increase the size of every character in the game by 1%. To make it easier to input the command without dying mid-fight, I decided that the size increase would occur after completing any encounter I was in. So, if I was fighting against 6 thugs, rather than increase my size by 1% every time I knocked one out, I would wait until I had knocked out all 6 and then increase my size by 6%. If you want to try out the cheat console for yourself, then I suggest you check out this video by Mr. Just Arkham Games, who was kind enough to provide video tutorials for how to install and use consoles in every single Arkham game. So, with that out of the way, let's get into the challenge. The first few combat encounters were as easy as could be, and by the time I cleared this room, everyone was already 18% larger than usual. This may not seem like a huge difference, but things were already beginning to change. Bodies were beginning to fly around screen, although I'm still not sure if this is due to the size increase, or if it's just Arkham Origins being Arkham Origins. Either way, it was clear to me that the inmates of Blackgate weren't the only ones tapping into the Speed Force, because climbing into this vent revealed to me that I now had the power to phase through walls. Despite being only 18% larger than normal, I was already having issues with fitting into tight places. I tried climbing into the vent multiple times, and every time Batman climbed into the ceiling and got stuck, completely unable to move. This meant that, unfortunately, I did end up having to size myself back down to normal. So, within the first 5 minutes of the challenge, I had already hit a roadblock. But I wasn't going to let that stop me from seeing what else this challenge has to offer. Blowing this guy up had a rather interesting effect on him, and also caused my despawned cape to pop back into existence. The next room immediately gave me yet another vent to climb through, so I had to change back to normal size to do this. The fight with Croc wasn't all that different than usual, but there were a few things worth highlighting. For whatever reason, my cape decided to lose all of its physics after spawning back into existence. This resulted in some really scuffed looking animations whenever I would cape stun or the helicopter would come down to let more thugs onto the roof. By now, I was also starting to think that the Flash may have just given his powers to the entirety of Blackgate, since Croc decided to vibrate violently towards the end of the fight. This didn't stop me from beating him though, allowing me to move on to the Batcave. After arriving, I increased my size by 6% because of Croc and the 5 Black Mask thugs that were knocked out during his boss fight. I guess I didn't have to count the 5 thugs, since technically Croc was the one who knocked them out. However, I know for a fact that Croc doesn't have to knock these thugs out, so I felt as if me failing to keep them conscious couldn't go unpunished. Anyways, now at the Batcave, I booted up the Batcomputer, learned that in-game cutscenes unfortunately scale characters back to their normal size, had a bit of trouble getting up these stairs, and then headed to the GCR tower to take down Eddie's hired help. The first thug went down like usual, as did the second thug. It was apparent to me now that vents weren't an issue so long as I crawled into them instead of climbing. Unfortunately for me, the majority of the vents in this game have to be climbed into, but we'll get into that later. The third thug was taken down with a rather interesting animation, and the fourth thug looked pretty much exactly the same as it normally would. The rest of the GCR tower wasn't anything special since it's just investigating a crime scene and hacking a few panels, so with the comms tower back up and running, it was time for me to head out into the city. By now, Batman had determined that having a list of every criminal in Gotham would be invaluable to his war on crime. So, the next order of business was to head to Jezebel Plaza and ask Santa for the naughty list. The fight in Jezebel Plaza was fairly standard. I started out with a failed glide kick before going down to unleash a flurry of strikes interspersed with very cheap batarang throws to knock everybody down before they could pose any threat to me. Ricky and I had a quick roleplay session as Spider-Man and Kraven before I decided I had had enough and delivered him a non-lethal 6-story headfirst drop onto the pavement. If there's one thing vital to fighting a war, it's a strong social media presence that enables you to spread propaganda to the masses. So, Batman hopped onto Twitter to work on some public outreach. However, Enigma had set up a signal jammer, preventing Batman from loading his page. It was right about here where the increased size really began to show its issues. Not only were thugs glitching into the ground at horrific displays of bodily mutilation, some were outright disappearing from existence before my very eyes. But, with Enigma's jamming signal now down and Bruce's Twitter back up and running, it was time to take down Penguin's men and track him down. The first group was pretty easy to take out, since I simply used the classic strategy of launching my opponents into space. I was hoping that I would be able to avoid taking down the second group by just hacking Penguin without being spotted, but unfortunately the game wouldn't allow me to interact with anything until these three were unconscious. But, after hacking into Penguin's comms, I managed to figure out his location and finally put my Twitter presence to good use. Getting into the final offer wasn't the easiest task. 9 armed thugs guard the outside, which usually wouldn't be that big of an issue. The only problem was that the increased size meant that a lot of things weren't working the ways they usually would. For starters, I couldn't pull anyone off a ledge using the Batclaw. This is usually the way I would clear most of these guys out, so with that option being gone, things were a lot more difficult. But with a few silent takedowns and an extremely scuffed fistfight, I took them all down and made my way inside. The first few combat encounters down here weren't the most difficult thing in the world, but I could tell that things were starting to take a turn for the worse. Hitting thugs seemed to be getting more inconsistent, with some of my hits completely whiffing at point-blank range. And at this point, knocking out a thug just resulted in complete and utter chaos, which was fun to see, but worrying at the same time. I was still in the opening 40 minutes of the game, and already things were devolving into madness. And with there being so much combat on the final offer, needless to say, I was scared for what was to come. But I continued on, and made my way to the boiler deck, where I was confronted by Electrocutioner. Taking him down was easy enough, but the following fight was where things went off the deep end. Combos were failing to start. Thugs were violently flailing around, clipping through the ground and walls, and even just straight up despawning in front of me. Everything that happened during this fight was so nonsensical and chaotic that I had to rewatch the footage several times and look up a normal playthrough of this fight just to figure out how many thugs I had even knocked out. In the end, I counted 15 thugs, 16 if you count Electrocutioner. Heading deeper into the final offer, I ran into more trouble after coming across this parkour section. Sliding under here was no issue, but I can't say the same for the climb afterwards. I was big enough that by trying to climb up here, I was pushed completely out of bounds instead of just getting stuck in the wall like usual. This actually gave me an idea though. I thought that since I still had control of Batman, maybe I could find a way to get myself back in bounds. But after many failed attempts at getting back in bounds, I threw in the towel and decided to size myself down to pass this obstacle. The climb through the deck access corridor wasn't any different than normal from a gameplay perspective, but visually it was quite the spectacle. On this catwalk at the top were 2 thugs, but I managed to get by only knocking out one of them, since the other didn't feel like coming to meet me at the door. The first 3 thugs in the casino were relatively easy to take out, and I wish I could say the same for the second group. This group presented 2 big challenges. First was the fact that I had to count how many people were in this second group, which wasn't the easiest task when they were trying to kill me and Batman took up half the screen. The second big challenge that this group presented was an armored thug. By this point in the challenge, everyone was so big that I was unable to start a basic 3-hit combo. If I had to guess, this is due to the fact that while the characters are getting bigger, the distance I'm allowed to be from a thug and still hit them doesn't seem to be. And since everyone is bigger, the amount of distance the thug gets knocked back when being hit is also increased. This means that after my first 2 hits in a combo, the thug will be pushed back far enough that I won't be able to land a 3rd hit. And unfortunately, this also applies to beatdowns, meaning that the only way I was taking down the armored thug was either by using a ground takedown or a special combo takedown. Luckily, it was possible for me to hit thugs consistently after getting into free flow, which was easy to initiate with a backclaw slam. Taking down Tracy was just as entertaining as it was easy, but the game must have thought I was having a little too much fun here, because after locking her up, I was tossed into the void. Sadly, this was a result of my insane size, so in order to continue, I had to try again and scale myself back down to normal. Anyways, I unlocked this window, dove through and ended up halfway across the room, and then emoted on my enemies before taking them all down. Contrary to what I was expecting, the brute was actually incredibly easy to take out. Since brutes don't move when getting hit, this allowed me to perform a beatdown on him without any issue. The predator section after this didn't start off great. The second I entered the room, nearly everything went completely dark. Even detective mode wasn't letting me see anything other than the thugs. While I could have simply reloaded the area, me and my genius mind decided that clearing the room under these conditions was still worth a shot. Needless to say, it didn't take long for me to get turned into a bloodstain on the wall. My second attempt was going a lot better until this thug decided to take a hostage. Since controlling Batman at this size was becoming more difficult, I thought that a great takedown would be a much safer bet than trying to get in close for a silent takedown. My plan was quickly thwarted though, as the game sent me to the bottom circle of hell for even attempting to engage with its mechanics. I actually managed to clear the room on my 3rd try, which meant it was time to confront Cobblepot about his shit-talking. However, the confrontation was cut short by Deathstroke, who had apparently decided that $50 million was more important than Twitter drama. Deathstroke's fight was interesting, to say the least. The inability to start a 3-hit combo made dealing any significant damage to him with normal attacks impossible. Not a big deal though, since I figured I would just use the backclaw slam. That was until he ended up despawning in the middle of the fight. I reloaded the fight and tried again, and wouldn't you know, he once again despawned right after a backclaw slam. So, with my only other effective method of dealing damage gone, it was time for me to channel my inner Injustice 2 and rely on chip damage to get me through the fight. The first 2 phases of his fight were easy enough, but phase 3 was by far the most annoying. The first 2 allowed me to deal consistent damage not just by running up and taking cheap shots, but also by countering Deathstroke's attacks. However, Deathstroke has an attack in phase 3 that results in no damage being dealt if it's countered. And this attack isn't exactly rare. I will admit that the extremely slow pace of phase 3 did prompt me to get a bit greedy, as I took a massive gamble on a backclaw slam. Lucky for me though, he decided not to fast travel out of the arena, and instead stayed to fight. He did end up trying to give Batman the same treatment as his parents, but Batman managed to just barely cling on to life. This was too low a health for me to be comfortable with though, so I purchased a combat armor upgrade. Immediately after purchasing that upgrade, I delivered a single hit to Deathstroke, which was enough to send him into the last beatdown, thus ending the fight. With Deathstroke down, it was time to finish my conversation with Cobblepot, but he didn't feel like coming out to play, so I headed over to Lacy Towers to frame him for murder. By this point in the run, I was 228% of my normal size. I was so big that it was actually faster for me to run to my destinations than glide. And while the massive speed boost in the city was amazing, there were so many detriments to being this big. By now, Batman was taking up about half the screen, effectively turning my monitor into Harvey Dent. I was also so big and fast that I had to begin crouching when indoors just so that I could see and control where I was going. And, as we've already gone over, combat was an absolute nightmare, and was only getting worse. But this was the price I would have to pay to eradicate crime from Gotham. Investigating the crime scene at Lacy Towers was no different than usual, so after that I went to the Batcave to retrieve the objectively best gadget in the Arkham franchise. If Batman wanted to take credit for winning the war on crime, one thing he would certainly need is to prevent the cops from doing it first. So, my next stop was the GCPD. Getting into the GCPD was a task an infant can handle, because every cop in Gotham has such bad vision that Warden Joseph probably has one more eye than is average for law enforcement in this city. In order to get deeper within the GCPD, I had to blow up this wall and go down the elevator shaft. The only problem with this was that I was far taller than the wall, so every time I placed explosive gel, it would get placed above the breakable wall instead of on it. I tried everything I could think of to get into the elevator shaft, but in the end, the only thing that worked was returning to normal size and placing the explosive gel the intended way. I then went about 20 seconds before running into the next impossible task, climbing up this 2-foot ledge without clipping out of bounds. But after finally getting onto the ledge, I was fine to slide into this vent and watch Gordon give his men a pep talk. In the next room, I once again had to size down to get into this vent, which led me to this room full of cops. I tried to sneak past everyone undetected, but somehow got spotted after hacking the panel. I tried my best to fight back, even throwing a smoke pellet to give myself a momentary advantage. However, I forgot that the smoke pellet had called in sick that night, so I didn't exactly stand a chance at this point. My second attempt, I took out this cop, which allowed me to hack the panel and leave the room undetected. After finding Ricky, I took down this cop and then tried to climb through the window, which clipped me through the ceiling and left me stranded out of bounds. My next try, I dove through the window instead, interrogated Ricky, started a fight with these cops, and watched this homeless man get his daily cardio in. I then blew up this wooden wall, which I luckily wasn't too tall for. Next up was the Predator section in the bullpen, which started off amazingly when I climbed this ladder and was immediately forced through the ceiling. But everything else in this room was anything but normal. My enemies were now so large that their sheer mass was beginning to affect the game in ways I had never predicted. Cops stood in place, unsure of what to do in tight spaces. They flailed around violently and cosplayed as Plastic Man after an inverted takedown before planking in the air when I cut them down. They climbed ladders so effectively that they were nearly able to get onto the vantage points themselves. One guy even tried to use spinjitzu against me. To say that the game was in shambles would be an understatement. But then I thought about it. It's just like Gordon talked about in Batman Begins. It was just escalation. I get bigger, they get bigger. I start using the vantage points, they start using the vantage points. I gain super speed, they gain the ability to stretch. This was just the natural progression of events. So I persevered. I cleared the room out and I went to the cell block. I took down these cops and I abused this inmate. I told physics no, and I walked straight through this wall. And at the end of all of this, what did I have to show for it? Yet another forced size down so that I can get into the evidence room. But with the disruptor now in my possession, it was time to stop a prison riot. I won't lie to you, the inmates did win the first time around. But, to be fair, the fire I kept stepping in did far more damage to me than any of the thugs, so who really beat Batman in the end? My second attempt was much better, and I was off to the GCPD server room. After deleting the official GCPD Twitter account, I made a break for it through this vent. I did have problems with this vent, but for once it wasn't with getting in. This time, I couldn't get out without getting stuck, forcing me to size down yet again. The fight against these cops was pretty easy, especially since half of them randomly disappeared halfway through. And now that they were out of the picture, it was time for me to hit the next roadblock. You see, I was now 297% of my usual size. This meant that certain actions, like opening a door for instance, were now much different due to how big my steps were. So, whenever I walked through this door, Batman would actually walk so far that he'd end up going straight through the wall, leaving me without even a ground to stand on. But I was determined to not let the game force me to size down again. By using a glitch known as door canceling, I was able to open the door without going through the animation. This meant that the door would open for a handful of seconds while I still had control of Batman, enabling me to open the door and then walk through it on my own. From here, I knocked out Gordon, deleted Brandon's backup from existence, and then knocked him out so that when he wakes up, he'll suffer from survivor's guilt for the rest of his life. My next task was to head into the sewers, which is much easier said than done. Even gliding to the sewer entrance was a difficult task because Batman's cape was now the size of a football field and took up well over half my screen. But I did eventually find my way there and knocked out these cops before entering. Upon entry of the sewers, everyone was 306% of their normal size. Now, I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt and assume you're not stupid. There's only a few minutes left of the video, and I haven't even met Joker yet. So, I'm assuming that by now you figured out that no, I did not go through the entire game like this, and it was the sewers that convinced me to finally admit defeat. To say that the sewers were unplayable would be the greatest understatement of all time. Batman was absolutely massive. Not only could I no longer see his head, I couldn't even see the bat emblem on his chest anymore. He took up so much of the screen that I was beginning to have a hard time determining what was even going on at any given moment, and his giant animationless cape was only making that worse. He was also nearly impossible to control by this stage. A single roll would send me across a room. The simplest of climbs sent me so far out of bounds that I would submerge in water above the map. I could only see about 2 letters while hacking panels. Even landing more than 1 punch in a row was an incredible feat. And that's just the issues with Batman. I haven't even gotten into the issues with enemies being this big. But instead of trying to put into words just how unplayable the game had become, I think it would be best if I just show you all the final combat encounter I suffered through.
You ain't no better than me.
So, I increased my size one last time, gained access to the National Criminal Database, glitched myself out of bounds, upped the field of view so that we could get a proper look at Bruce, admitted defeat at the hands of Gotham's criminals, and proved that no, you cannot beat Batman Arkham Origins if every knockout makes you bigger. Although this challenge didn't get very far into the game, it was still incredibly fun to attempt, so expect similar challenges to this sometime in the future. Be sure to like or dislike, comment, and subscribe. And finally, be sure to check out the Pineapple Pie podcast, which I'm a host of. We've recently released 2 videos on Arkham Asylum, which I'm sure you'll find interesting, so check them out. That's all I have for now. See ya.